Hi, I'm Patti Podesta, and I'm a production designer of film and television. I love big things. I love working on complex, big things. There's actually a great Godard quote about the only films you can make by yourself are those of your feet, which actually I made a film of my feet when I was in graduate school. I didn't know that then. What you can make with a group of people who all have the same idea is pretty profound. I remember the first time I did this short film for somebody and worked with people who have all won Academy Awards now. And when I saw the dailies and I was the production designer, when I came back, I was really blown away by what we were able to do as a group. My aesthetic has been described a lot as spare and moody. I don't like things that are overwrought. I'm not particularly interested in Gothic quality, even if it's a period film. I think that I deal with space a little bit differently than other production designers I see, and architects, and decoration. I'm not as interested in what should be in the living room as what the camera's going to see. One of the first things I ever did was one scene in the original Jurassic Park for Rick Carter. It's the scene where they're eating lunch and there's a slideshow going on around them, which is discussing the ethics of cloning dinosaurs. And I designed all these slides, and then he asked me to basically design the set. And so the slide projectors were all off screen in these towers, tented to try to get rid of the noise, back projected onto screens in this room. And I said to Rick, I think we should put projectors in the set with the light, with the same slideshow, defocused so that the light shines on their face. And he said, now you're thinking cinematically. I've heard from directors I love that I bring a lot of conceptual ideas to the table, and I feel like I now have, and part of that is the money, the technical expertise to pull off things that are much more complex than what we do in art school. For Gregg Araki, the director of Nowhere, flatness was a philosophical point that he started from. The flatness of it, fake clouds, falseness, were all things that I was very in tune to in sort of Baudrillardian kind of way. And it was pretty direct, kind of, I know how to do this sort of situation. I found it frustrating to not be able to produce spaces that people could move through. And I remember asking Gregg at a later date, when he asked me to do another film, was, are people going to be able to walk this time? I was really interested in exploring deeper spaces and more complex spaces, but I loved the graphicness of Nowhere. So when you get to something like American Gods, I think one of the starting points of American Gods is the House on the Rock, which is this massively insane architectural gem, but it's this very discontinuous conglomeration of architectural styles, and anything goes there. Discontinuity is really the name of the game. And that was really paramount for the idea of American Gods. So I really started by designing 5 or 6 of the major sets simultaneously, some that were otherworldly and others that were Americana, and trying to sort of coax out the differences between those things and orchestrate them. But pragmatically, being able to produce almost any space you want is really such a wonderful situation. And one of the first things I actually designed was the house for the Russian gods, which actually in the book was written as almost, a very low rent, messed up place where they had lived forever. And I thought that it should be sort of faded elegance that they had when they had come to this country as gods. That they had a whole floor of a building, and it has now deteriorated. And Neil Gaiman loved that idea. It was not what's written in the book, but he really loved it. So I took these cues from architectural apartments in Chicago, the kinds of molding, kinds of space. Big part of it is being able to move the camera from room to room so that it's very wide and then it narrows really quickly. Those kinds of movements through space, I think, are really important. And that's what I mean about designing for the camera as opposed to what the living room should look like. And then we did, I wanted to do this really complex finish on the walls that looks like thousands of years of paint, some of it peeling. It's a bit of a conceit, but this is one of the things that a project like American Gods, which is not rooted in a kind of realism. There are levels of expressionism or fantasy, and you maybe get to articulate each of those levels. There's also one of the sequences with a woman who lives in Brooklyn and ends up dying and being taken to heaven by one of the gods, and we had to build like a tenement apartment for her. So that's sort of a different level of realism than these Russian gods. And so those kinds of measurements, if you were, are really important in defining which one will have a kind of opulence, how that's prescribed, and then maybe taking a step away from that. With Defending Jacob, which is set in the suburbs of Boston, and I had done suburbia a couple of times. But the question of suburbia, which suburbia are we talking about? There are many ideas of suburbia, and they each have a lot of specific details to them. So that kind of working from the inside out, being as completely detailed as you can about who you're looking at, and then using that as a springboard to move from, is really important. I think that's one of the ways when we start a design project, you always do consider the socioeconomic level of the people you're talking about and what their intellectual level would be, what their, all those kinds of things, and to begin a design. But I always think that what you edit out is almost more important than what you allow in. It was written it's in the book that the mother of Jacob went to art school, so we actually allowed ourselves to have interesting pieces of art in her house, and that became a thing, actually, that most suburban houses don't have interesting pieces of art. The rooms are very cleaned up, very tidy, and they open onto each other so that you have this sort of tunneling sensation, which is not the way, particularly in Boston, the houses are, but I think produces a kind of quality of the enclave of the family. So we were sort of working for that. I discovered that Morton Tilden, the director, loved really square sets with not a lot of arches, really angular things. I think it was part of what he was describing as it being graphic. And so the rooms are all like that, but the objects in them are the objects of everyone's house, and it's any color. And I think that there's a kind of familiarity that comes with that works really well when you place a lot of familiar things against a space that is maybe a lot more severe than you would originally think. I think it produces both qualities of the graphic and the familiar. I have to say that the biggest tool for me, the biggest change since I became a production designer is SketchUp, and our ability to pop up these models and set lenses and look at things prior to building them. I had a construction coordinator say to me once, "You never move a wall, Patti," and I said, "Because I've already done it in the model." It's an enormous tool for comprehending the kinds of shots you're going to get, and these things that I'm talking about, like being able to tunnel through a space when it becomes too broad, when it becomes too complex, when it's not complex enough. It's actually an amazing tool that I use a lot. I actually often start the design of something myself and then turn over the model to my set designers and have them finish it. It's a way for me to think through space now.